This weathered bronze Corinthian helmet is a physical artifact of a deep paradox at the heart of the ancient Greek world. The Greeks shared a common language, a pantheon of gods, and institutions like the Olympics. Yet their lived reality was defined by constant internal warfare. Across the Aegean, hundreds of fiercely independent city-states, or polis, existed in a state of perpetual existential competition over scarce territory. In the early centuries, these conflicts were chaotic. The Homeric ideal of combat relied on free-flowing skirmishes and high-stakes duels between individual aristocrats. This style of warfare was driven by arete, a specific form of excellence where a warrior's manliness and deeds were measured by individual glory on the battlefield. Over time, that individual hero vanished. In his place came a wall of anonymous bronze, erasing the ego inside a crushing heavy infantry collision. The new protagonist of Greek warfare was the Hoplite, a heavily armed citizen soldier equipped with a standardized panoply of bronze armor. These hoplites fought in the Phalanx, a rigid, rectangular formation that packed men shoulder to shoulder in ranks up to 8 deep. The Hoplite Phalanx functioned as a sociotechnological machine. This formation was a physical manifestation of communal trust. Survival no longer depended on a hero's sword, but on a soldier's willingness to stand his ground for the men beside him. To understand how the Greek state formed, we have to look past the myths of heroism and analyze the physical constraints of the armor itself. We begin with the individual hoplite's panoply. While the helmet and breastplate provided defense, the most critical piece of military technology was the shield. Known as the Aspis, or the Argive shield, it was massive, roughly a meter in diameter, with a deep, concave wooden core faced with bronze. What separated the Aspis from earlier shield designs was its internal construction. As seen in this rotating wireframe, the shield utilized a unique double grip mechanism. At the center sits the porpax, a bronze band designed for sliding the left forearm entirely through. At the outer rim is the antilabe, a letter grip firmly grasped by the left hand. This specific system provided incredible bracing strength, allowing the hoplite to absorb heavy impacts. However, it severely restricted the user's left arm mobility. The shield could not be easily swung or pivoted. That single physical limitation forced a macro-tactical consequence across the entire battlefield. Because the Aspis covered the user's left side and projected outward, a hoplite had to stand tightly packed to their neighbor, using the right half of their own shield to protect the unshielded right side of the man to their left. This overlapping protection locked the men together into a continuous, unbroken barrier of bronze. Breaking rank to charge forward was a lethal liability that exposed the entire line. The equipment mandated the tight formation. The biomechanical constraints of the Aspis enforced a mutual physical dependency. Before the first vote was ever cast in the assembly, the shield had already made communal cooperation a requirement for survival. Historians heavily debate exactly when and how the Greeks transitioned to this rigid formation. Moving from the open combat of Homeric heroes to the locked shields of the classical Phalanx was a contested process rather than a single event. Looking at this timeline from 750 to 450 BC, we track 3 academic models explaining how the Phalanx evolved. The rapid adoption model argues the double grip Aspis caused an immediate tactical shift, forcing armies into tight formations within a narrow 50-year window. The gradualist model suggests a slower curve. It posits that as middle classes grew wealthier, more citizens afforded bronze armor, necessitating denser defensive tactics. Finally, the extended gradualist model argues the heavy infantry phalanx didn't mature until much later, stretching into the 5th century. To determine which model aligns with reality, we examine the physical archaeological evidence. This is the Chigi vase, dated to roughly 650 BC. It provides one of our earliest depictions of hoplites marching to war in dense ranks. But notice the specific weapons they are holding. These warriors are carrying raised javelins, not traditional heavy thrusting spears. The presence of arranged weapons inside a dense formation supports the extended gradualist theory. It shows a lengthy transitional phase, where troops still fought like Homeric warriors, even as their gear began to pack them together. The primary historical case study is the Lelantine War, fought between Chalcis and Eretria in the late 8th century BC. In this conflict, the opposing states drew up unique battlefield agreements that strictly forbade the use of ranged missiles, like bows and slings. Yet records show both sides relied heavily on aristocratic cavalry and lightly armed swordsmen, rather than a fully realized heavy phalanx. Greek military doctrine was not an instant invention. It was an evolution strictly tied to the underlying economic rise of the middle class over centuries. Once that evolution was complete, the fully realized classical phalanx engaged in a brutal, highly specific style of combat. At the center of this combat was a maneuver known as the othismos, the mass push. This top-down schematic illustrates the physical collision between two opposing hoplite blocks. As the lines meet, the ranks behind the front line drive their physical weight directly into the backs of the men in front, compounding pressure forward into the enemy line. This dynamic turned the battlefield into a highly pressurized scrum. In a mass crush of bronze and bodies, fear was as lethal as the enemy's spears. If one man stumbled, the entire formation could collapse. The historian Thucydides recorded a specific phenomenon during these engagements, a distinct diagonal drift, where the entire formation skewed to the right as it pushed forward. This drift occurred because soldiers unconsciously stepped to their right, seeking the cover of their neighbor's shield to protect their own exposed side during the chaotic push. The othismos weaponized communal trust. Surviving the mass push meant refusing to break rank, making psychological cohesion just as critical as the bronze armor itself. A common misconception portrays the classical phalanx as a static, thoughtless monolith. In reality, commanders actively sought advantages, innovating within the strict operational constraints of the formation. To see the ultimate evolution of the hoplite formation, we advance the timeline to the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC. The Theban general Epaminondas faced a dire tactical problem, deploying his forces against the legendary, undefeated Spartan army. Instead of matching the Spartans in a standard parallel engagement, Epaminondas executed a radical innovation. He stacked his left flank to an astonishing depth of 50 ranks, driving that concentrated weight directly into the opposing Spartan right flank. This created an asymmetrical, localized overmatch. The standard Spartan line could not mathematically withstand the concentrated pressure of the othismos at that single point. By shattering the Spartan line, Epaminondas proved that mass and momentum could be engineered to overcome even the most prestigious infantry in Greece. These late classical innovations proved the phalanx was adaptable, paving the way for the dominance of the Macedonian pike phalanxes under Philip and Alexander. The phalanx was the ultimate crucible of the polis, a system where economic status and biomechanical constraints locked together to make communal survival a physical requirement of the battlefield.